Welcome, Jack.
Yeah, Jack.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here, Stewart.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Hey, so is it true that you're from the Bronx?
I'm afraid to admit it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm from the Bronx.
Okay, good. Now that explains half of what I want to know.
Where I grew up in the Bronx, there was like you were either going to be a criminal or you were going to get out of there somehow. So I picked criminal.
Right.
So, were you playing music in the Bronx?
No. My family moved me out of the Bronx to get me away from the good element.
Yeah, right.
And I went up to Rockland County to live, which I thought was the sticks. It was really only 20 minutes from Manhattan, but it seemed like forever away. And there I started playing folk music and then
writing songs.
I wrote a lot of songs and I didn't pick up an electric guitar until right after the Beatles.
Yeah, right. So folk music.
But I would go back to the Bronx all the time, and particularly
for
like to go hang out around Times Square.
Amazing.
Who knew that I would end up working there?
But
not at the record plant.
But you did start like at the record plant pretty early on, right? And you started as an intern. Interns didn't exist back then, but
I started as the janitor. I swear that's the
real.
truth. I was making a record because I was after picking up the electric guitar, I had a pretty successful run as a musician, and I played in a lot of bands that were signed to major labels. And the last record that I was doing was being produced by the Isley Brothers at A&R Studios, and the name of the band was Privilege, and I was a songwriter and playing bass in it and singing backup. And the Isley Brothers, they had a label called T-Neck Records, and we were the rock artists signed to what was basically an R&B label.
Right.
And so, but this is 1969, and the band was really a New York version of Led Zeppelin, which was just starting to get popular. And I say a New York version of Led Zeppelin because not only did we convert blues to heavy rock, but we had a Hammond organ, which was very New York. You had to have a Hammond organ if you were a New York band. So that's what we were doing, and they signed us, and we went into A&R Studios, which was Phil Ramone's place, and recorded a great album in about 2 weeks' time. Very open, very ambient, very heavy. And they told us to come back in about 10 days to hear the mixes. And 2 weeks went by, and we didn't hear. You want to hear this story?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 weeks went by, and we didn't hear from them. We were wondering what was going on. So what went on was this. They listened to this very open, ambient, heavy rock band, and they went, "Gee, it's kind of empty. Why don't we put some congas on it?" So they put some congas on it, and then later they were like, "There's only two guys singing, one guy lead, one guy backup. Why don't we put the girls on it?" Well, okay, so they put some girls on, and by the time they got that deep in the water, they decided that the ballad needed strings and that there could be a single if they added horns. So we came back to hear this thing, and the drummer fell off his chair.
It was an Isley Brothers record.
It was nothing. It was like a weirdness. And so the guitar player said to me, "Jack, you got to say something. This is like really fucked up, man. Whatever happened." So I said, "Okay, I'll talk to him." So I said to Kelly Isley, the conga player, that's Jimmy Malin, right?" He goes, yeah, that's right. That's Jimmy Malin. And
Wow.
those girls, those are the girl singers. Somebody who knows who Jimmy Malin is. And the girls, those are your girls? I said, yeah. And who did the horns? By the time I got into this, he knew that I was. He looked at me and he said, "Do we have a problem?" And I said, "Yeah, we do." I said, "Remember you signed us? You said you wanted that white boy rock band on your label. Well, this isn't it." So I thought I handled it pretty well. He stood up and he said, "Do you know how much this cost to do this?" I said, "Well, that's not really the point. I mean, we gave you a full record. It didn't need anything." And he said, "Well, fuck you, man." And he got up, and the Isley Brothers walked out and left us sitting there. And then Rudolph Isley came back. He was the oldest one and the wisest and not so hot. And he came back, and he looked at me, and he said, "You think it's fucked up? You mix it." And he pointed to me, and I had no idea what to do. And he gave me 2 days to mix it, and I went back into
At A&R?
Yeah, I went back into the studio, and I was the worst menace. I sat. The engineer's name was Tony May, and I sat at the board. I said, "Tony, it was an 8-track." I said, "Tony, do you mind if we start with the bass?" He said, "Well, I like to start on the bottom, drums or bass. Go ahead." And I sat there, and I looked up at what I didn't know was called a channel strip, and there weren't faders; they were potentios, and so. I looked at these buttons, and there was a thing that had numbers on it that said, the first row said 20, 30, 60, 120. And then there was also a dial that went from +1 or -1 to -10 or +10. And he was patching something in, and I brought the bass up, and then I hit 60, and I did +4. What's this do? And the old Altec speakers started to go. I said, "Well, that sounds good. What happens if you go all the way here? I'd like 120 +10. I said, "Fuck, that sounds great." And this poor guy was going out of his mind. And I was going, "Tony, did you know that this does this?" And I tortured that guy all day. By the end of the day, we got nothing done. And I said to him, "Why don't we just release the rough mixes you did?" He said, "We can't do that. It was 7.5 and blah blah blah." I said, "Okay." He said, "But I'm not doing this." And what became a very long thing that went on in my career. He said, "The only way I'll let you come back is if I can gaffer tape you to the chair and put a gag in your mouth."
We wanted to get to the gaffer tape chair.
Yes, I got gaffer taped many times. And so the next day I just watched him. It was marvelous to watch what this guy did. He only he would mix a verse and then go on to the next verse, and then he would mix choruses, and he would have different EQs and echo for each section, and then he'd cut all those tapes together. So it was really incredible to watch this. And so at the end of it all, I asked him if I could have a job. I was in love with this process. And he said, "I wouldn't let you anywhere near this place. You're a danger to audio." And so he said, "But these other guys are opening a room, and some people from here are leaving."
Right, and we'd like them to go out of business, so get over there.
There you go. So he sent me down to a record plant, and I walked into the room. They were constructing still the A and some of B. And Paul Prestopino, who was the maintenance guy, was sitting at the receptionist desk and coveralls. I said, "I'm looking for a job." He said, "We need a janitor." There you go.
Rod O'Brien told us yesterday that he met you in a closet.
In
painting
Studio
a
A.
closet.
Painting the closet in Studio A.
Is that what?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I was. Wow, you got a good memory, Brian, and that brings back memories. Yes, and I finally came out of the closet.
Yeah, I set you up.
Much to your disappointment.
So what was the process of janitor, and then they let you get into rooms eventually, right? Because you really did that was the end game.
They did. And, the first step is you become a general worker. Well, they hired a proper janitor right away. I mean, one look at the toilet and they knew.
Was it Willie?
Yeah, it was Willie.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I got moved to general worker. And that summer, the summer of 1969, they were doing Woodstock. And they were bringing the tapes back, and the artists that were at Woodstock were doing their overdubs, and so I just seeing the artists that were in the rooms there, I knew that I was in the right place, and it was going to be a very exciting adventure to be there, and so from general worker you get moved up with some training to the dubbing room where you're making copies for people, you're making dubs, tape copies for clients. And then on to assistant engineer. And at the time, it was
How long did that take?
It took a year.
Right.
And it was very, very cutthroat because there was an old regime there, and there were these old assistants, and there was a new regime that had just come in from A&R, which was Roy Cicala, Shelley Ackes, and later Jay Messina.
Right.
And then later, again, Jimmy Iovine came over. But so the old assistants did everything to sabotage you. They did not want you to get their gig. And the old regime guys were kind of moving out of there. They were leaving. They were going west. And they were leaving it to the new guys. And so if you got on a good gig, somehow they would erase your name off of it, especially when you were assisting.
On the booking sheet?
Yeah, on the booking sheet. You would suddenly see, some other guy was doing a date you thought you were doing. And you would do everything to make sure you didn't do it. But I got in with Roy Cicala, who was, took me under his wing as he did you and Shelley Ackes originally at A&R, and Jay and Jimmy Iovine and Dennis Ferranti and
Steve Marcantonio
and a bunch of guys that he took over and he mentored. That to him were going to be his boys, and he protected me. And at one point I got moved. I was an assistant, and I got moved to cutting demos. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but during cutting demos, you cut 4-track demos. And this was very early on, and I was cutting a 4-track demo in Studio C, and a bass player put his beer, Patti LaBelle's bass player, put his beer between me and the remote, and I knocked it into the board, and it set fire to the transformers, and it was a terrible mess, and I got fired immediately.
Really?
Chris Stone came in.
Nothing in the fire extinguishers.
Yeah. I mean, we ruined the board, and Chris Stone came in and fired me. You're fired. Leave. And so I left, and I thought my career was over. And Patti LaBelle insisted that it had been not my fault, but Chris didn't want to hear it. And Roy Cicala said to Chris Stone, he goes, before we officially fire him, he's already gone.
Right.
We should listen to the 4-track, because if it's good, because 4-tracks are hard to do. You got to do everything. You got to do all your compression, your echo, your everything, and all your rhythm dates, everything are going to one track. All the balances have to be right. He said if the tape is good, we should hire him back. He's going to be more valuable to us than the problems that you're going to have with fixing this board. If not, if it sucks, then fuck him. So they listened to it, and it was good, and I thought it was good. And so Chris Stone called me back. I was down in my apartment in the Village. He called me back, and he said, "You can come back.
You're back in, kid.
You're back in, but you're getting a major decrease in your pay." To pay, yeah. So I went there. I was already at $65 a week. I think they put me at $50. It's a long story.
Anyway.
Guys,
you. Well, Roy kicked me out of my first control room. I mean, first time I assisted for him, I unplugged all the stuff he had preset from the previous mix, moved it all out, thinking we'd start fresh, not understanding. And he literally called the studio manager and said, "Get this idiot out of here."
Mitch Plotkin.
And literally, I walked out crying, and Steve Marcantonio came in, and I remember sitting in the tape library, like literally crying. And then Dave Hewitt came in and said, "You'll be okay, kid."
Yeah,
it was like really fucking scary.
We all have to go through that. I mean, and I hope any of you who are going into this, I hope you all have a mentor that that shows you the way, that leads you. I try to do it for some people that I take on to work. It really makes all the difference in the world if you're not doing it on your own in the beginning. Even if you've been to school. There's a process that you don't learn in school. You learn the technical stuff, but there's a whole other thing going on. And Roy was, he was a brilliant engineer. I mean, absolutely a genius. And you learned that he would give you hand signals that meant a lot. It would be, And you'd know, that was a cheeseburger with fries, onions, bacon on the side. I mean, it would be like this, just very subtle. If this would be like plug in the EQ, put in the compressor behind it, add 3, that would be. Those were the signals you would get to understand, and it made it all fun.
And, how long did it take to get to the engineer level?
I was really lucky. I think it took 2.5, 3 years because of Roy's giving you dates. In other words, he had clients that were to him were like, this guy, he's not going to notice if somebody is screwing up. This guy, so I'll give this client to Jack or to any of the other guys. Meanwhile, he took 10% of your date. There was always an RC on your date, so he was getting 10% of whatever was brought in, which was okay. But he was giving you the dates, and it was so generous of him. They would be like, I would get this. It's funny because we're watching The Deuce, which was that's when this was going on, 69 to wherever 80 at Record Plant. And so one of the clients that he gave me was a pimp that would come in at midnight with his buddy, and I'd have to put the guns under the console. They would tell him to stash the guns under the console. Okay, all right, fine. And then they would have these hookers who could sing, and they would record them. They would they would already have the tracks done, who knows where, and these girls would sing. And these were CODs, which meant I had to collect. Rod, were you ever on any of those dates with me? Yes, he was. I had to collect the cash from these guys at the end of the night. That's not fun.
And this is Hell's Kitchen at 1974 or
73.
74.
And so I would have to wait until their girls came off the street with cash.
Wow.
To collect the money.
Hey, that could be an episode on The Deuce. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Those are the dates he gave me. And in the daytime, I would be assisting on jingle dates. It'd start at 9 in the morning. You would have a Ford commercial or an Eastern Airlines commercial. Then in the afternoon, you might assist Carmine Rubino on a great jazz date. Mm. And then in the evening, you would get a rock date, the James Gang or Mountain, or somebody like that to assist on. And then at midnight, boy, here come your date. And and then you would sleep under a piano at 5 or 6 in the morning, get up at 9, and start your setup of 40 pieces for an orchestra date.
Yeah, no, it's incredible.
Fun. It was fun. Did we have help? Yes, we did.
We sure did.
And so, what was it? How long was the transition to starting to produce records?
I did this New York Dolls album. That was the first New York Dolls album. Todd Rundgren was the producer, and the Dolls were, I don't know if you guys remember the New York. They were really raw. And I lived downtown. I used to go see them at the Mercer Arts Center. I was totally into this whole Dolls thing, and Patti Smith, who I ended up producing, and Lou Reed, who I ended up working with. But I was into that whole scene down there at Max's. And so Todd was like a really popular producer and brilliant. And I'd worked with him on Nas records. And he was the producer. It was a bad combination, completely bad.
With him in the band?
Yeah. I mean, he would sit next to me. The band would be out there playing like Personality Crisis or Trash or one of these songs. And he'd lean over and say to me, God, this is fucking awful.
Well, he was also used to like Bat Out of Hell. And like his thing was...
this is much earlier.
Right, but I'm just saying like his aesthetic and even his records aesthetic was not very punk.
Lots of harmony, lots of production. Yeah. This was raw.
Yeah.
And so I was saying, I said, this is kind of revolutionary. This is really cool. It's raw. It's like, it's proving that you don't need to learn to play an instrument to play an instrument. They're just doing it. And a funny scene happened. So in fact, it was Personality Crisis, and David Johansen was in a booth singing the guide vocal, and Todd came in and he was just a mess. I mean, he couldn't he thought it was terrible, And he said to David, he said, "This is going to be great." He says, "When we add some harmony." And David Johansen looked at him and he said, "Harmony? Are you accusing me of having melody?" But he was really taking the piss, but that was kind of the last we saw of him. He would phone it in after that. We didn't hear from him much at all until we mixed the record. And we did it without a producer. We used to keep the label out. We would meet them somewhere, And the only people who knew what was going on was their managers, who were rooting that this record would get done. Jimmy Iovine, by the way, was my assistant on that day.
Wow. Amazing.
And we had a lot of fun on it. And these guys were... A lot of them were out of their minds on heroin while we were doing it. And it was like just crazed.
Also, the background vocals that are on that are one of the greatest gang shouted non-harmony. They're just unison shouts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's harmony.
Right.
We got the record done. I know this is why I got into production, but when it was done, Bob Ezrin, who I'd been working with on the Alice Cooper record, said to me, "You're producing."
That's great.
And so he had me do some productions in Canada for his company, and at the same time, and they were very successful records. And at the same time, David Krebs, who managed the Dolls, said, "Listen, we appreciate what you did for the record. We know what went down. But we have this baby band that we also manage. You might be the producer for," and that was Aerosmith. So pretty much, I did Aerosmith, and then Bob asked me to produce Alice Cooper, and then
amazing. What Alice Cooper record?
Muscle of Love.
Nice.
And so there was no. It pretty much took. I produced Patty after that, and it just. And I'm still doing this.
How did
Strange
you choose?
thing.
Oh, sorry.
I
Go for it.
One of the things that I was doing before I got into, while I was playing in rock bands, was I was composing music for TV shows. And I don't know if any of you guys were even there, but I used to still do that while I was a janitor, or maybe I was cutting debs, but somewhere in between, I was still scoring TV shows. And so I would come in as a client under a different name to do the TV shows. I was doing the ABC afternoon.
What was the fake name?
No, it was my real name, John. John Douglas. So Jack is a nickname. So I would come in as John Douglas and do these. Were you on some of these, Rod? Yeah, I would do these TV shows.
Wow.
And I'm back to doing that in LA now.
Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
It's fun.
So when you started producing, how did you pick your engineers? How did you decide?
The one guy that I did a lot of jingles with was Jay Messina. He was like, they brought him into Record Plant because he had a tremendous following with the ad agencies. So I would always assist Jay on these early morning sessions, and these were 3-hour dates, could be 40 pieces, with a rhythm section, with singers and an announcer. And in that 3 hours, they left with 2 mixes, a 30-second mix and a 60-second mix.
Right.
Well, there were 28 and 58.
Was it all recorded live? Live?
No. The orchestra, the rhythm section, sometimes the rhythm section with the orchestra, sometimes just the rhythm section, then the orchestra, then the singers, then the announcer,
Gotcha.
mix, done.
Right.
And this guy could do all of that. I know people who take a week to get a drum sound. This guy was doing a whole thing and mixing it in 3 hours. And that was what he did.
We're talking about Jay.
Jay Messina, yeah. And I used to marvel at this, and so I thought, and it always sounded great. The drums sounded great.
Right.
Everything was perfect. It was all great. So I knew that when I was going to, as I became a producer, who did I want to do my dates? The guy that wasn't going to drive an artist crazy.
Right.
I hit the snare again.
Right.
Oh, could you hit the tom?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Go play. I'll get a sound on it, and that's. And I mean, and I could talk to him in engineering terms, maybe a little more 5K. I could be a 5K on it, just to get a little more percussion on it. Mm-hmm. We could talk like that,
right?
And here we still, over 40 years later, we're still doing it, and he's
Fantastic.
as good as he ever was.
Yeah, we had Jay on our first episode, our first podcast, and it was so great talking to him because
he's incredible. And the most even guy, aside from his sense of humor, which...
How much of that plays into, like, being on a date, being on a record, knowing that his vibe and his personality is what it is?
This is something that I tell my students, because I teach at a college in San Francisco. I do a workshop, and I tell them, look, here's the thing. You guys might think that actually the course is called The Psychology and Etiquette of the Recording Studio.
There we go.
Perfect.
And the thing is, it's not about how great you guys are. You know this, you know that, and everything else. It's about how you make the session feel. Mm-hmm. How do the musicians feel? This is a joyful industry that we had. We make music that's joyful. You guys come in with long faces and think that you're doing brain surgery. I mean, it's not that. You got to make an atmosphere. You got to make sure that you know these players' first names. You have to listen. You have to participate. You have to make it feel good. If it feels good, the recording's going to come out great.
Right.
If it feels shitty, no matter how good the recording is, it's going to suck.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that we get into. And honestly, as a producer, I've tried to avoid working with artists that I think are going to make the whole process suck.
Right. But also like this, considering you spend so much time in the studio, 12, 14 hours a day, I mean, if I wanted to be miserable for 12 hours a day, I'd be like something
I'd just
else.
go home.
Yeah, right.
I can spend time with my family.
Sorry.
Anyway, but that's a different.
Too much information.
So Ezrin kind of gives you the little incentive, and then Aerosmith. And then I remember I jumped on probably in '82 assisting for you and Rod and on Zebra. And I mean, I learned things. And Michael Schenker group. I know the two records that I worked on with you. I mean, I was a huge Michael Schenker fan. So when I saw myself on the schedule, because I was a UFO fan.
Oh, cool.
So when I was just freaking out about that. But that was like such an experience for me to see you guys making these records. And the last, the Aerosmith record you guys did, Rockin' a Hard Place. Uh-huh. It was just like such an experience, like just dealing with how people make these kind of records.
I'm glad you remember it.
I remember some of it. There's some stuff I'd like to not remember.
Yeah, right.
I can't unremember everything.
I can. I mean, it was there was a time when there were so many drugs. Myself, I'm sober a few decades, but there was a period there where the drugs worked, and I can remember when I'll give you a progression. Okay, there's the Aerosmith progression. We did Get Your Wings. Oh well, this is pretty good. And we'll do a little coke and smoke a little bit at the end. Well, it's okay. And then we did Toys in the Attic. Wow, a little LSD doesn't hurt, does it? And then we did Rocks, and then at that point, everything was working. We had honed our craft. They had honed their craft. The drugs were not getting in the way, and then we went to draw the line, and then it collapsed. The year between. Not quite for me, because I think I just didn't do anything for a while. Just like, I'm not working with Aerosmith. But they were out on the road. So they continued to get fucked up, and by the time we got to draw the line, they couldn't perform hardly at all, and it was painful to do the record. But it managed to get done, and there's some good songs on it.
Yeah,
but at that point, is when you see my name show up as a writer, because I was like, if I'm going to write this, I'm going to put my name in.
Right.
But it was tough. It was tough. So drugs got in the way, and eventually they caught up with me, and I had to take a vacation to get away from it. But you got to be careful. It's now we're all a little smarter. I think we're all a little smarter.
Yeah, I also,
I have two sons that are in the business, and that's not even something that they consider. I have one that's a jazz artist, and one that runs a giant hip hop. I don't know what you call it, but they do Jay-Z and Kanye, and it's a big, and it's not something that he even would consider at all.
Yeah. I also think now studio time is so valuable, you know what I mean, that when you get in and out, you really don't, you got to focus and get stuff done. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's no 3 month, but at least in my, alt rock, indie rock world, it's like, there's not the 3-4 month records now. You really have to go in and just knock stuff out.
Right. Honestly, right now, I don't know how it is for you, but most of a record's budget is my upfront. Because I have a studio, so I can put them in a studio, and I have a few people that I can mix with that that are not this last project I was talking about. Right. That was Shelley and Jay, and that was very expensive. But I had a giant budget for it. But on these smaller projects, there's no back end anymore for a producer.
Right.
There's no back end. Everything has to be up front.
Right.
Now, so people that want to work with me, if I like the band, I'll do it for nothing.
Right.
It's like, this is cool. I mean, or barely anything, as long as it doesn't cost me anything.
Right. Right.
But for the most part, I'm doing the Yardbirds, producing the Yardbirds next month.
Great.
In Boston at the Aerosmith studio that Jay and I built for Aerosmith, and they had to crowdfund to raise money.
Wow.
To do the record. There's no label. I mean, Aerosmith's not even on a label, and I just finished Joe Perry's solo record. It's on Kobo, which is, I guess, a pretty good label.
Right.
But he had, he sold it after it was done, and
right.
And he really had no budget at all.
Right.
I mean, he had to pay for it himself.
Right.
So the whole paradigm is different.
Totally. Anything there's just no back end. An artist gives his music away to get people to come to his show, and that's how they make money.
Right. Or some random licensing and stuff like that.
Right.
Get in Spider-Man 3, you might make.
Yeah, which is the success that I have with this band that I just did with those guys.
Oh, so tell us about this project.
Yeah. It's a silver. It's called Silver Plains, and very quietly and without much fanfare, they place almost everything.
Amazing.
They take the instrumental versions. The biggest one, we had a huge one. The first record we made, we did a song called "Where Do I Belong," sold to a national rehab. I mean, it's just
right.
He's just got his finger on the pulse of what's going on. So these records pay them for themselves, and we have a surplus.
Right. I got to start writing songs about Cialis.
Yeah.
So is there, for the producer, when you play something, is there a back end when the band places?
No.
Right.
No, unless I write.
Right.
With them. But no, because there's a surplus, the upfront is fun. The budgets are great for these things.
Super.
And scoring is very good.
So you're back to your scoring.
I'm scoring, yeah. And scoring, you're 5% of the whole budget for the film. So if you have a $10 million film,
right,
you have a fat budget.
And
so
are you scoring in a rock idiom or
no? Everything from rock to jazz to full orchestra.
Wow, great.
The whole
great.
gamut.
Is that fun?
Absolutely, it's great. I have a great orchestrator, a guy named Dan Coe who did most of the David Lynch films as an orchestrator, and he's pretty wacky. He gets me, and and we get along really well. And it's so weird because he's an evangelical Christian, and but he never brings it up. Mm-hmm. But we just get along great. Like I say, he's a total whack job.
It's amazing.
So you'll write on piano or guitar?
I'll write on piano, guitar, and then we go into Logic.
And then start working on the arrangement?
And then pretty much can print it out, print out the score. But he's watching my back.
Right.
Jack, that's oboe, that's not cello.
Right, gotcha.
Right. Right, that's the kitchen, that's not the toilet.
That's exactly right.
So, because we don't have a lot
of difference between a shower curtain and toilet paper?
What?
So you're the one.
Well, there's the Bronx. On that note, no. So, because we don't have a lot of time, is it okay if we have a minute about John Lennon?
Sure.
Or just, because
oh my God,
that must have been.
You have a minute for John Lennon?
A proverbial minute. But what was the first day like of that? We talked to Rod a little bit about that, but your experience
as a producer, with John.
Yeah,
I mean, I spent a lot of time with John before the I got to produce him, and we got to be pretty good friends. And he trusted me with Yoko's work as well,
right,
which we did a lot of, didn't we? But we hung out during the years in L.A.
Right.
and Madness, and
you were out there.
I was out there, doing Alice Cooper.
Wow.
So we had a relationship that went beyond the studio, which to him I think meant that I had no agenda with him.
Right. What was it like putting him on mic? What was that?
Yeah,
I couldn't imagine what that would be.
He was. He knew how to work that mic like nobody else I'd ever seen.
Right.
He used to have, when we were doing Double Fantasy, he had this. He didn't like to use a pop filter, and what he would do is, if he knew there was an S or a P coming up, he'd catch it. His hand would go across, catch the P or the S, and then throw it away while he was singing, which was pretty wild to watch somebody do that. But and I've been asked this, like, who was the easiest artist I've ever produced? It was him. He really drew the line between what a producer does and what the artist does, and he didn't come over and into my territory ever.
Amazing.
I mean, he was there for the mix, and God, you couldn't have anybody better to be sitting next to. But he would do 5 vocals. He'd say, "Put them together. Let me know. I'll come out and I'll double it when you finish. When you find the one you like." I'd combine the 5 vocals into one. He'd come out, listen to it once, and he'd double it. The thing was that when I got to do Double Fantasy, John was very insecure at that point. He wasn't. I mean, no one knew we were making that record for a month. When I was rehearsing the musicians, what I had done was I charted all of the songs he sent me on a cassette from Bermuda. And my first reaction when I heard the cassette, he asked me, he said, well, he called me up, he said, what do you think of these songs? He didn't like them at all. A good number of them were for Ringo's album. And which he talked about at the end of, another shit song, I'm giving this one to Richard Starkey, would be at the end of a song. And when he asked me what I thought, and they were very primitive demos, done on a boombox, he asked me what I thought, and my first reaction was, I can't do any better, to tell you the truth. I think you should just release these. They're incredible. I mean, yeah, they were primitive, but it was a whole other, and he just laughed at me. He said, no, we're going in the studio to do this for real. I said, okay. But I mean, almost got myself out of a gig, which was a pretty good one. But he said, listen, no one can know what we're doing here because at any moment this could stop. And if the news people get hold, or the press gets hold of that I'm making a record and I fail at it, I'm going to feel like a fool. So I don't want anyone to know we're making this record. So he wanted musicians that were his contemporaries, so that if he called out a song, which he did frequently, to jam an old Everly Brothers song or something, or a Buddy Holly song, or a Cochran song or something, they would know it. He wanted contemporaries. So I hired a band of his contemporaries. I put together really amazing guys. Tony Levin, Hugh McCracken. Just wonderful players. And then I went to SIR and I rehearsed with them, and I had charts. I had charted out the songs. I'd done arrangements for him. He let me do the arrangements. And I'd have them play, and I would sing the melody line on a mic. And they were like, whose record are we making? Guys, I hope it's not yours, because you sound like a frog. Because I was singing everything an octave lower, really, than he was. And they didn't know for 2 weeks. And what I would do is I would record the rehearsals at SIR and then go back to the Dakota and literally jump in bed with him. He liked to work in bed. I'd jump in the bed with him, and he had around his bed, he was surrounded by instruments and tape machines and TVs and just all around the bed, everything. And he could reach behind him for an acoustic guitar, which was an Ovation, pull it off the wall, and listen to the cassette of the rehearsal. And he'd say, just change this a little bit. And he'd play me something. I'd go, okay. And then I would write that out. And then I'd go back the next day and make that change with the band. And this went on for 2 weeks, the band not knowing who we were recording.
Amazing.
Until the last rehearsal, which was at the Dakota. And I told the band, this rehearsal, meet me on the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West. And I pretty much was suspicions confirmed when we met there. And we went up and we had a dry rehearsal in his apartment with acoustic instruments.
Amazing.
And it was just so he could kind of get to know the band. But he knew some of them. In fact, what he said to Hugh McCracken was great. Hugh McCracken was in Wings with Paul. And he said, that the work you did with Paul was very good. Oh, thank you, John. And he says, that was just a rehearsal for what you're going to do with me. So anyway, we dry rehearsed, and the next day we were going into the studio, which was also sworn to secrecy. The old Hit Factory on 48th Street.
Yes,
the old one near 10th Avenue, out of the way place. No one would see him. A record plant, they'd see him going in and out. At this place, they wouldn't. And so we rehearsed dry the songs. And on the way out, I think it was Tony Levin, Hugh McCracken, myself, were talking to him as he was walking us out of the door. Now, at the door, he had a Fender Rhodes piano, so that when he came in the door, if he had an idea and a cassette machine, he could sit down at the piano and play. Or if he was leaving and he had an idea before he left, he could sit down at the piano and play. And so we were walking out the door, and he said, "Oh, wait, Jack." He said, "I just wrote this the other day, and it wasn't on any of the tapes that I gave you." He said, "But I think it's got like a Roy Orbison kind of feel. Let me play it for you." So Tony and you and myself stopped, and he sat down and he played "Starting Over."
Jeez.
And I said, well, that's a fucking single.
Yeah.
It's great. And it tells this whole story of what we're doing. And it should be the first song that we record. And this way we can rehearse it with the band and play it right away. And so that's what it was. It just felt great to work with him. Of course, he was very grounded at that point.
Right. And Do any of those cassettes or do any of those things exist?
Some of it came out. Some of it was released. The Beatles finished 2 of them, and it was funny because they did it from copies. And I was with Ringo a couple of weeks ago. In fact, Ringo gave me this. It says "Peace and Love." I was with Ringo, and he said, "I lost my copy of the tape." He said, "Do you have one?" I said. He said, you guys should have asked me. I said, I have the original, like the first generation. You could have done Real Love and Fly, like, from my tape.
So Real Love is from that?
Yeah, that was on my tape. And so I made a CD copy for Ringo and gave it to him a few weeks ago. But the thing is, on my copy, there are John Lennon songs that, that no one has ever heard.
Right.
And I don't know if they'll ever be heard, but anyway, I get to hear them,
right?
And it's incredible, and and I miss him, and I truly believe that it would be a different world if he were here with us.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's pretty epic.
Wow.
Fuck.
I guess that means we're done.
Are we?
Questions from the audience?
You want to take
questions?
Anybody?
From the audience? You have to stand up and shout.
There's no lack of engineers on Silver Planes. Who were they?
Oh, I didn't. I thought I mentioned that.
No, we didn't get. We went somewhere else.
Oh, okay. So I did this project, Silver Planes, and Mix Magazine is covering the whole process. So you'll probably read about it soon, early next year. But the article is going to be called "Sounding Analog in a Digital World," and it was 15 songs. I mixed 5 with Jay Messina, all to tape, at Avatar before it closed. Then I mixed 5 with Shelly Akis at Aftermaster Studios in Los Angeles, which used to be Graham Nash's studio. And then last week, I mixed 5 with Jeff Emmerich, and I can't tell you how much of a blast it was to work with these 5 individuals. I have 3 songs left, and I told Al Schmidt, you better be ready for me at Capitol to complete the picture.
Jay mentioned this to me, but how did you pick the engineers who were going to mix the did you?
By song. By song. This sounds like it's for Jay because it sounds like what Jay does.
Right.
These 5 sound like maybe what a little bit Tom Petty-ish, perfect for Shelley, and these sound like they could be British influenced. And if you work with Jeff Emmerich, you could say to him, "Can you give me a Ringo sound? Of course. Can you make that guitar sound like George Harrison? Oh, no problem." And he does it.
Yeah,
I mean, you're
incredible.
like, "Oh my God, it's great!" He does it. And so I've been mastering this. I've already mastered the first 5 at Sterling, and I've begged Greg, "Don't go anywhere yet. Don't go anywhere yet," so I can do the last 8 actually after I finish with Al Schmidt. I'll do the last 8 at Sterling, my favorite mastering facility.
Greg's here.
Any other questions?
Can you elaborate on your relationship with Dennis Ferranti?
Oh, okay. Dennis Ferranti and I played in bands together for years. In fact, we were signed to Columbia. We signed to Epic Records. He was the lead singer. I was the bass player. The name of the band was the Swamp Seeds. And we had
the band with the congas.
Huh?
Was this the band with the congas?
No congas. Straight up bubblegum rock band. We had a hit record. It was big in Cleveland. It was called "Can I Carry Your Balloon?" And it was just terrible. I mean, there was no metaphor there. It was strictly "Can I carry your balloon?" But it was a hit. And so Dennis, I just love Dennis. And so when I got into the studios, when I got into Record Plant, I knew that they were looking to hire some more people. And Dennis, who didn't have a technical bone in his body, because of his personality, I knew that Dennis was going to fit right with Roy. Plus, Dennis Ferranti was paisan.
Yeah.
So I knew that was going to be a good fit, and again, Roy took Dennis under his wing, and Dennis went on to become a Grammy-winning mastering engineer.
Great.
Hi, Jack. How do you deal with an artist who comes up with an idea that you don't think will work?
Listen to their idea first, because it might be good, and so you have to. A producer has to get his ego out of the way. The most important thing for the project is the music itself, and the artist is the music. So remember that you're not making your record, that you're not making them by your rules. You have to listen to what the artist has to say first, and then there may be a compromise. It may be something that his idea might work with yours. But certainly to shut an artist out, or to say no, or I don't want to hear it, or always go there first, and that works best, and also gets the artist trust. I mean, you have to set boundaries, like keep your hands off the compressor, please, or those kind of things. But I'm not playing your guitar. Don't play my compressor, really. But otherwise, always listen to the artist's ideas first, and never. They might sound wacky to you. They might not be in technical terms. Try to translate them same way into something that works for you. Okay, we're done.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for coming over. Thank you, Jack.
Awesome, man.
What a pleasure. A pleasure again.
Thank you, Jack.